Here's Mark and Suzanne revolutionizing radio.
Well, good morning, everybody, from those of us here at the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is an amazing day, not just because it is Friday, July 20th, year of our Lord 2018, but Mark Kreslins rejoins us today for the Mark and Suzanne Show, revolutionizing radio. Want to wish you all, Mark, I'm delighted to have you back. We had a close call with you last week. I just want to welcome you back to the show. I'm going to do a couple quick announcements, and we're going to just jump right into what we've got to talk about. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. And you can also listen to us on our Android app. It is free. We have a radio code loop. You can listen to all of our shows. Mark and Suzanne Show, The Paradigm Shift with Jeff Johnson, also the Renegade and the Rambler Radio Show with Jeff Johnson and the other co-founder of the network, Daniel Bailey, who has a show of his own called The Bailey Report. A couple weeks ago, I launched an episode of Case in Point, brand new show I'll be doing from time to time, where I take Supreme Court decisions. I highlight the lack of conformance with the Constitution and how these cases, how they were decided, what are we going to do, how they affect our lives, were they properly decided. First case, I had Marbury versus Madison, with I consider the expert of all experts on constitutional issues. Kevin Gutzman joined me. And next up, I have Heller. I'm going to be picking apart. Everybody considers that the authority on our gun rights, Second Amendment rights case, and I'm going to pick it apart and tell you conclusively and prove to you once and for all, Antonin Scalia was no conservative. He was no originalist. He got it wrong. And people probably think, who are you to question such a great jurist? Well, we're going to just tell you the truth. Mark, I want to welcome you. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing fine. It's been an interesting last 10 days, and I am certainly glad to be back here live with you, Suzanne, on the Mark and Suzanne Show. Indeed, we are trying to revolutionize radio, because radio actually does need to be revolutionized. We're tired of the same old status quo stuff. And so, you know, we hope folks to bring an offering here that will grow in numbers, because the reality is the status quo shows up there are just offering no solutions. I mean, it is just boring to listen to, honestly. I mean, you're just repeating and reciting the same problems. We are unbelievably well skilled at complaining. We are unbelievably well skilled at believing the Democrats are the problem, or Barack Obama or Hillary are the problem. And this is what they do Monday through Friday for 9-10 hours a day. And then we wonder why nothing changes. Well, here on our program here, we're going to offer real solutions to real problems out there. Now, some of these solutions we talk about are going to be unfamiliar to you, because we've been indoctrinated. We've been brainwashed into believing the very things we talk about that find their source in our historic record. We have been brainwashed to believe there are no longer options or solutions available to us. Well, we're going to explain to you why they are. And not only that, why you need to get on board and begin organizing yourself in your state to begin this next leg of the real fight against the real tyrant. And it is the bipartisan, corrupt, morally bankrupt, illegitimate de facto versus de jure government located in that 10-mile square swampland we affectionately refer to as Washington, D.C. Folks, that is the problem. It is Washington. It's not the Democrats. It probably is the Republicans to some degree, but they're the wrong. The two-party system is the wrong way to approach this problem. You've got to see that 10-mile square of swampland as the problem. And I'm thankful to report more and more people are beginning to come to that conclusion, Suzanne.
Yeah, and what we hear, just to reiterate what you said about day in, day out, all day long, mainstream media, we hear all these solutions going towards Washington, D.C., that they're going to emanate from there and from there only. We have the resources over here at this network. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center. I know you don't like him, Mark, but I really appreciate it.
No, I don't. You're golden. I don't like either one of them.
Right. So, and they don't like you either. Just so it's all out on the table. But these guys have some very great resources. Mike Meharry has his podcast. They come on here. I've written several articles for the 10th Amendment Center as well, which I'm very proud. We also give you other options so you can educate yourself. Listen to Mike Meharry's podcast. We have Liberty Classroom, tremendous resources that we use on this network derived from their sources, their lecturers, their courses. And speaking of their courses, you can get a basic membership if you're a Cerberus Radio Network to Liberty Classroom. Go to libertyclassroom.com. When you go to the shopping cart, hit CRN. And I'm just going to be very honest with you. We don't even have a financial agreement with them. It will benefit everybody if they learn the truth about our history, about the proper role of government, proper role, how to deal with economic situations. Guess what? It ain't going to be from the Federal Reserve, folks. We're so convinced that if we just let our government handle that, everything's going to be okay. Well, we're going back and forth bickering about Trump, about the Russians, about all this nonsense. We have the true enemy, which is our system of fiat currency imposed upon us by tyrants in Europe and the central banks. And we have the Federal Reserve, which is stealing our wealth right from out from under us. And nobody's talking about that. But we'll get more into that. That's more of a mission statement for our show. I want to touch on the incident that happened. We almost lost you, Mark. And we're laughing about it now. But at the time, I wasn't laughing. And I'm sure you weren't. I'm sure Patty wasn't either. Why don't you talk about what happened? And let's take that experience. And, we try to not only make a difference. If we have this conversation, we might actually save a life if people are listening and learn from what happened.
No, I appreciate that, Suzanne. It began a week ago. Well, it would have been Wednesday morning. It was 12:30 in the morning, Wednesday, and I woke up just not feeling well, but kind of a nondescript not feeling well. I couldn't really pin it to anything. Tried to go back to sleep, and heart was racing, a mile a minute. I went in and checked my heart rate. It was well over 110, and something just wasn't normal. But, being the stupid, stubborn man that I am, I went back to bed and thought, well, this will just pass and I'll go back to sleep. So I just couldn't get back to sleep. I kept on hearing my heart in my ear. And so I woke up my wife and I said, Patty, I'm not feeling well. And, she, of course, my lovely wife, who I am just so blessed to have her as my wife. She literally saved my life. And I'll explain why. So she got up nervous, wondering what was going on. I told her I had this just kind of dull ache in my left arm, but it wasn't any sharp pain. Then suddenly one sharp pain came down my left arm to my thumb. And I thought, well, that's odd. And I thought, well, maybe I should go to the hospital. And I suggested it at first. But as the stubborn idiot I am at times, I talked myself out and said, I probably just slept wrong. I have a bad AC joint from previous sports injuries. And I thought, well, maybe I just got that joint wrong, and that was what caused the pain. So let's all just go back to bed. And, of course, Patty would have nothing to do with that. She planted her feet that we were going to the hospital. And honestly, there was a bit of a heated exchange about whether or not I needed to go to the hospital, insisting that I didn't. We all just needed to go back to bed and just relax. Well, her wisdom prevailed, and I, submitted to her reason. And we drove to the hospital, went in the emergency room, got right in immediately. As soon as I said I had chest pain, they took me right back. And, of course, they did the normal workup. But here's what's interesting. And Jeff, I know you're going to weigh in on this at some point as well. Here's what's interesting. I didn't have any classic symptoms of a heart attack going on. I didn't clutch my chest. I didn't have that I couldn't breathe. They kept on asking me, does it feel like somebody's sitting on your chest? And I said, no, it doesn't feel that way at all. Do you have any sharp pains? I said, I had that one, and that was it. And so they drew blood and checked for enzymes in my blood, and they were not elevated. So all the indications were that I really wasn't in any trouble. But I had this young physician there. The cardiologist came down from the cardiology department, and he took a history. And I have heart disease in my history with both my parents, my biological parents. And so he decided, well, we better play it safe here and just keep you overnight. So they had ordered the stress test for the next morning. And then I just can only consider this to be providential. They changed it from a stress test to a catheterization. where they run a wire, and then they use contrast dye and x-rays to follow that wire up into your heart to figure out what's going on. So they did that. And by the way, they no longer use the femoral artery, Jeff. They use the radial artery in your wrist. And it's this tiny, tiny little puncture hole in my wrist that they ran this wire up through to my heart. And even then, they didn't see the blockage at first. And then they stress test my arteries, and boom, the blockage showed up, 88% blocked, and the lower descending artery, or I'm sorry, left descending artery. And the doctor came around and said, Mr. Kreslins, can we put a stent in that, please? Are you okay with us putting a stent? Because we need to open that up. So I said, sure. And when he blocked the artery to put the stent in, then I felt the pain for the first time that I understood to be heart pain. So went ahead and did the stent, and that was successful. And now I'm in recovery mode. But they came up and told me the next day, they call that artery the Widowmaker, that had Patty, I get teary-eyed just thinking about it, had my lovely wife not forced me to the hospital, I could have just dropped that out in the back lawn. So let this be a warning to everybody. Suzanne said something prior to the show. You know, we talk about normalcy bias a lot, and how normalcy bias prevents us from dealing with reality. It just, our natural instinct is to say, oh, it's not that bad. You know, these guys are crazy that are saying these things about restoring federalism and states defying Washington, D.C. You know, we apply normalcy bias to pretty much everything in our lives, including chest pain and minimal chest pain. I mean, really, I had so few symptoms. My normalcy bias said, I'm fine. Just stay home. My wife said, you're not fine. You're going to the doctor. And she saved my life. I mean, I think I could have very easily the next day went out mowing a lawn, and my daughter would have come up and found me laying in the front yard. Because you don't come back from this, apparently. This is one of those arteries that when it blocks, you don't come back from it. Had a friend of mine that had the same procedure done. They caught it in the emergency room, and they told him that had he even had the heart attack right there in the emergency room, they would not have been able to save him because it's such a catastrophic failure in that artery for blood supply to the heart. So I am glad to be back on the air, and I'm feeling much better as a result of that stent. I don't even understand, Suzanne. I now do understand how sick I really was, but never really. You acclimate to it. You know, it's the normalcy bias. It's just, you know, I was feeling sick for months up until this point. Now that I feel so much better now, it's like, gosh, why didn't I detect any of those symptoms? And it's that doggone normalcy bias was just pushing me, you know?
Well, and you know, you have so much going on. I think you've got an echo.
True.
Do you have a headset, Mark?
I do, but I have to go get it.
Okay. We had so much going on. There was just an echo for a minute. Maybe it's gone now. You had so much going on in your life. You were working so hard. You know, you've got Free the States. You've got, you know, campaigning so hard on Dan Fisher's behalf and everything else you were trying to do in Oklahoma. And then you also mentioned that other injury as well. So it's very easy when we consider everything else going in our lives. By the way, if you want to join the conversation today, 717-467-1736. Mark Kreslin, Suzanne Sherman, Jeff Johnson producing here. He will answer the phone. Thank God Patty put her foot down and got you to the hospital. However, there was still one final hurdle that God stepped in and saved you both from the ride over there. And this is where Jeff, who has history as an EMT, has literally saved lives in an ambulance. So fortunately, nothing went wrong. But what we have to think of, because we really think we're strong and we try to be strong and not overreact and call an ambulance, we have to think how our decisions might affect others. So, you know, what would happen if you had crashed in the, you know, had a cardiac incident in the car, an intense one, an acute one, and Patty's driving now?
Yep.
How is she going to handle it? How are you going to handle it? Could you get help at that point quick enough? I'm going to let Jeff elaborate because this is really his area of expertise.
Well, we discussed this, and I jokingly said I was going to give Mark what for going by personal vehicle. But this is not uncommon. So Mark, what you did is just happens every day. Yeah. And just so everyone knows, here at Cerberus Radio Network, we talk about politics a lot, but we also talk about life. And so this just falls into place with what we talk about because, there's a lot more to this life than just talking about what's going on in Washington or in Sacramento or Salt Lake City, wherever it is. So, yes, I was 11 years a paramedic, and I was telling Mark that I just couldn't count on one hand the number of times that I picked up someone from their car, usually the husband, dead in the passenger seat, and the wife hysterical in the driver's seat because he was having chest pains and was going to the hospital. It is that's just the way it is. People normally bias. Exactly what you said. People think, oh, it's indigestion. It's whatever. It's an old injury in my arm. And I was telling Mark also before the show that diabetics specifically, they have what they call silent heart attacks. They don't even know they're having a heart attack. They just don't feel good. And so, Mark had all the classic signs of having a heart issue, but, because of all other things, it was just all hidden. And so I would just urge people that if you're having any symptoms, specifically if you're diabetic and you just don't know why, you just don't feel good, or if you are having chest pain and it's going into your left arm, absolutely call an ambulance. I quite literally I was pushing the stretcher in. I was looking at the monitor. The guy went into cardiac arrest. I grabbed the paddles. I shocked him. He came back to life. We were driving down the road to the hospital. He went into cardiac arrest again. I hit him again. He went home. He's alive today. He went home from the hospital after catheterization. Get an ambulance there. It may be the difference between you going home or going to see your maker. So that's all I have to say about it.
I'll tell you, I got read the Riot Act by the physicians in the cardiology department about what you just said, driving in. They said, listen, when you go home, and if any of those pains come back, do not drive yourself or have somebody drive you. Call 911. Get into the hospital. So they back totally what you're saying up. They do not want civilians managing heart problems in the field. They want professionals on the case from the very minute they arrive at your house all the way transporting to the hospital. Because as you just alluded to, the reality is if you crash on the way, Patty could not have done it. She wouldn't have known what to do. She's not CPR certified, at least for the last 20 years. Now I know that recently the American Red Cross has said, just do something. If you can do anything to keep blood flow going while 911 is on its way, whether Patty would have known to do that, I don't know. But
even if she did, let's say Patty was a certified EMT, she's driving the car. You don't have the guy driving the ambulance back there getting the paddles, pulling over to do that.
Right.
Patty's job was to drive and get you there safely. Imagine the emotional stress she would have been under had you crashed, and then trying to cope with that. We try to make a difference here. We try to give people solutions. We share our experiences as well. And hopefully someday, if somebody's feeling this, one of our listeners, they're going to say, I remember that those three crazy people doing their little radio show. I'm going to take an ambulance. And
yes.
Hopefully, this information will save a life. And that's what we try to do here. We try to give people advice that is useful. We try to give you solutions, and we will share our personal experiences as well. Earlier, when I was mentioning the shows, I did omit one of our newer shows, and that is The Other Side with Justin and Mike. They are two high school teachers who, like me as an attorney, part of the problem. They are part of the problem as public school teachers. And jumping from their experience to try and redress the situation and using their knowledge and experience in their respective fields as well to provide people with information. And they're a great show. I put on our Radio Co app this morning, and one of their shows was on absolutely solid programming. You can just go onto our app and hear this and always hear something relevant, something, even if it's a little bit dated, you're going to hear useful information. I would rather hear something that's 3 months old on this app than what's going on Fox and Friends this morning. So just a little aside there, and a shout out to Justin and Michael for the hard work they do as well. So something else that was going on this week, and you didn't get a chance to weigh in, but we're going to do it right now. I submitted some new graphics. I have a friend who's a graphic artist, and I'm proofreading a book he's writing, a post-apoc book, apocalyptic genre book. And in exchange for that, he's been doing some work for us for graphics. So I have a new banner picture up. I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet, but it shows the Cerberus dog and Cerebus dog. And what Cerberus? I think it's spelled wrong on our thumbnail. I'm actually looking at it. Cerberus Radio Network.
Might be, I don't know.
We need to change that. Anyway, it has this three-headed dog, and when I was first looking for a name, we were going back and forth forever, and I finally came across one going through thesauruses for other names that I liked, and it said it was a surly but formidable guard, and I really liked that. It's also a mythological figure as the three-headed hound that guards the gate to Hades. Mm-hmm. And I thought, we are guarding people from the Hades that we call Washington, D.C. We are not guarding the gates to protect them. We are trying to protect freedom and liberty, and that is the gate of tyranny. So the image, if you haven't seen it, shows the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It's up in flames. The dome's up in flames. There's smoke everywhere. And then it shows our banner and that we're defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. And some of the responses they loved it, but there were a few there that said, what makes you think no government's a good idea? Or why are you anarchists? Or do you think violence? People are going to think that you're right-wing extremists looking for violence. And to me, and I'll let you weigh in a moment, both of you after, to me, this shows that our freedoms are going up in flames. Our government has gone up in flames. This is just absolutely out of control. But what's also interesting, if you look in the background, it isn't a big city and buildings. It's more of a green hills, empty hills, and it has a very post-apocalyptic flavor in that. And it ties in with so many of our sentiments that I elaborated upon earlier. But also, we tie into it is going to be painful to right this road that we are on. We are going to experience possibly collapse-like conditions, which is why also we focus heavily on preparedness. So those of us that understand the proper role of government will be prepared to weather the calamity, the firestorms, the chaos that will ensue when it comes time for correction. If we can't do it politically, it's going to happen one way or another. And this ties in all those events. And you know what? I'd be fine if Washington, D.C. went up in flames, because this is what is very difficult for people to let go of. If we just get to the Constitution, we get the right Supreme, I'm just saying burn it all down. And, and that is not unpatriotic, because the founding generation, the ratifying states, had a provision for this. It is called Article 5. Well, everybody's, ranting and raving about who our leader of the free world is, who the next Supreme Court justice is going to be. The power ultimately resolves. It comes back. It lies back with the states. So the states with Article 5, they can call a convention, and they can even dissolve this form of government, which is, again, a philosophy that harkens back to the Declaration of Independence and consent of the governed. I'm going to let you run with that. What do you think about that, Mark?
Well, I'll tell you, when I saw the graphic, to me it was hopeful.
Same here. I like this.
That's right. It wasn't so much about our liberties going up in flames. They've already gone up in flames. It was like, well, this is what could happen, and then we could be free again. So I had a totally different reaction to it. And because the reality is, you just alluded to, is we have been brainwashed, and we just have to accept it. This is the problem with the defiant, the freedom defiant conservative. They will claim to be free, or always just one election away from being free, and pound their chest about this system that will supposedly bring about this freedom, yet living with a certain amount of cognitive dissonance, knowing intuitively they really aren't free. They really are nothing more than slaves to a new master. The plantation happens to be Washington, D.C. That's where the master resides. And when they say jump, we typically say how high. Now, they live with this cognitive dissonance because on the one hand, they actually think they're free. They're totally conflicted. And when I and you and others assault that the system of government is causing us not to be free, they knee-jerk reaction say to, yeah, but the Constitution's the greatest document of all time, and if they would just start to obey it, defying 240 years of history that they have no intention of following it. And they live in this contradictory scheme. Where does that come from? That comes from decades of brainwashing. It's the Stockholm syndrome. You become sympathetic to your captor. You actually begin to defend your captor. So we have a job to do, and it is to break people free from that thinking. There really is a new need for a resurrection of freedom and what that means. And so that image graphic, I thought, really did express freedom, because that's who's not letting you be free. That stupid dome up there where all those megalomaniacs gather throughout a year and pass more laws against you. They abdicate their role as lawmakers to federal agencies, which then write regulations against you. It's always against you. And to get away from an abusive spouse, you know how you get away from an abusive spouse? You get away from them. You leave them. So if we can imagine Washington, D.C. being the abuser, it is abusing you. It is writing laws against you. It is writing regulations against you. It is constantly threatening to take your property. It will take your life if you don't comply with an unjust law. They will murder you over an unjust law because you continue to believe they have the power. You have lost your way. I had lost my way. I had believed that Washington, D.C. was the center of the universe, that everything that's going to get fixed is going to come out of Washington, D.C. We had a saying, Suzanne, back on our old show, The Forgotten Men, with my good friend Joshua Lyons and Scott Strelzik. We used to say, Washington, D.C. cannot fix Washington, D.C. And we've got to break that thinking that we're always just one presidential election away. We're one politically connected lawyer in a black dress away from fixing all this. Kreslin, just shut up and just stick with the GOP plan here. We are going to get the right Republican and the right justice in there. And you just watch and see, bucko. Everything's going to be incredibly better. And yet, Suzanne, what does our history tell us? It just gets worse. Things change.
It always worse. We have a great comment here from our good friend Andrew in Pennsylvania. He says, politicians are calling for gunning up mobs and there's crickets, yet you publish an image of our government on fire and people lose their stuff. We'll just say stuff. And so imagine now how apoplectic they are that Hillary, despite the Russians influencing on her behalf because of all the money that they have pumped into the Clinton Foundation, that is collusion right there. So forget about influencing the elections. Some Facebook ads are nothing compared to the cheating, the wholesale cheating, the setting her up, setting Bernie Sanders up as controlled opposition. They rigged their own primary. The media got in on it. They cheated. Obama was spying on the opposition candidate. They are calling for violence against us simply because their side lost. Imagine what's going to happen once enough people wake up and realize the whole thing can and should come tumbling down. That's where we get the flames. That's where we get the smoke. That's where we get the chaos, which we can come out from and be better for it. So that really explains our what is behind us when we have the imagery there. And one person said, well, you might lose some patriotic listeners if they see that imagery. Look, if you're going to be so easily discouraged by an image and not listen to what we say, go listen to one of the mainstream networks, or you know what, there are plenty of them with this media now and the ability we have to have a voice. Anybody can go out and put a radio show up on YouTube and be heard. And there are the ones out there with the stars and stripes behind them, the AR-15 behind America. Yeah, you have those options. But I tell you what, folks, that is not patriotism. Patriotism, and I have said this before, quoting the George Orwell article, is really a sense of adhering to your founding principles, and it is defensive in nature. It is conservative, truly conservative in nature, just like the American War for Independence was conservative in nature. They wanted to hold on to their rights as Englishmen, their natural rights. We want to hold on to our natural rights to be governed by a system to which we have consented. We don't have that. And that's why we are making people uncomfortable with our talk of secession. Lincoln did not settle that. We have, if you look now, and again, I'm not going to name him, but I will quote, there was an afternoon radio host, I appeared on his show, and we were talking about federalism. And he said to me, we need a Supreme Court to tell us what the law is. Otherwise, we will have fighting in the streets. And I told him fighting in the streets is what we have now because we have 5 politically connected lawyers in their black government issued costumes, black robed high priests, the judicial temple monkeys, the courtoons, as our winner called them, telling 320 plus million people what the law is, regardless of their local preferences. We have some major issues. Every single issue now becomes a point of contention, particularly the ones over which this bipartisan, corrupt, illegitimate national government never had the power to control in the first place. Case in point, huge point of contention, major brouhaha on my Facebook wall yesterday. I had commented on a friend's post, young gal, she used to live in California, and I had known her from personal connection with my riding horses, and she posted an image, and it was from some feminist website, and it said, I went to Planned Parenthood and I got a wellness check, a breast exam, check for STDs, low-cost birth control, you know, blah, blah, blah. Everything but, right? Everything but. And my comment was, and you tell me if this is offensive, this is abusive, argumentative. And I said, you're a very lucky person. Millions don't survive the experience. Kaboom! Heads exploded, particularly from these young millennials in their teens, absolutely out of their minds, the cuss fests. Many of these people involved were animal rights activists, by the way. And on one of them, I commented, because she had a picture of a horse that she was rescuing, or a horse rescue, and I said, well, no love for the unborn, huh? Boyfriend chimes in, you shut the F up, you backwards, a Trump-loving, blah, blah, blah. We are met with such overwhelming resistance when you try to interject an idea that they find reprehensible to them. What idea do they find reprehensible? The idea that perhaps it is not an optimal solution to an unwanted pregnancy to murder your unborn baby. And contrary to what this young lady is saying, it is not just a clump of cells. And then she said, well, the baby becomes viable. Now we're changing. We're changing the standard here. The same person, when it can have a heartbeat, can have its own experiences, wait, that's after birth. First, you're justifying these actions by saying it's a clump of cells. And then the argument goes to, I don't see you in line outside of any foster homes waiting to adopt. None of this is factual. Mark, have you ever gotten in line to adopt a baby? Is it like, you know, McDonald's where you can just show up in line and get a baby? Because I know you have adoption experience in your family. What did Jennifer just get in line and voila, get a baby?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works here in Oklahoma. You show up at DHS, you get in line, take your ticket, and I'll take one of them and one of them, one of them. Oh my God. I saw some of those comments, and it is disturbing. But boy, doesn't it show you the power of the indoctrinating education system we have? Where do these young minds get these stupid ideas that a baby is nothing more than a clump of cells when its DNA is specific to it. It is a separate created being. It has its own identity and fingerprints and all that is associated with being a separate and distinct human being. It's not a tree. It's not a giraffe. It's a human being. And yet they've been indoctrinated in their public school systems to believe, well, you know, women's rights are sacrosanct and they trump a baby's right to life. Then think about this, Suzanne. You and I are both old enough to remember a day when motherhood was celebrated. It was what defined womanhood. They were special because they could carry a baby. Men could not carry. This was a unique gift that defined womanhood. What defines womanhood in the 21st century? I can murder that baby.
Yay!
I have the legal right to murder it.
And then they say how oppressed they are. Yeah. You are the only group of individuals in the history of humanity that has a legal sanction to murder what was once held precious, a miracle. You can murder it for your own convenience. And this girl first said, I can't afford a baby. Would you support it? And I said, wait. Your family is very wealthy. You have a barn full of show horses and a farm bought and paid for. Your family wouldn't support your little baby. And the mom chimes in and said, I told her many times I'd be happy to take her to the nearest clinic and solve this problem for her. So now you are so depraved, you will murder. I will say this. If you have not been a mother, you have not given birth, I can understand their point of view because my views have changed as I've gotten older and really since I became a mom. Now it's not even on the table. I can't even justify it under any circumstances. But to say I can't afford it when you can, a grandmother that will refuse to even help you, and if you don't have the support in your own family, and then it shifted to, I can't take the break in my career, and then I would now get back in shape again. All these, I don't want to do this to my body. This is all a matter of your personal convenience. And then what they're saying is, everybody hates us because we don't want to become mothers and have children. No, nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying we demand you give birth. Nobody's demanding that you do this. We're just saying if something happens, you don't murder the product. And I said, here, tell you what, if you give birth, if you have this procedure, if it happens to you, and they run a DNA test, are you willing to accept life imprisonment for murdering a human being? And then she just laughed and said, no, abortion's legal, completely, avoiding the point. And this is such a huge issue. And the violence we are seeing from, I don't care if it's immigration, if it's gay marriage, if it's homosexuals picking on Christian bakers, there is a war going on right now. And the problem is everything has been nationalized. People don't get representation. The less they feel they have representation, the louder they're going to scream and the more violent they are going to get, not towards the source of this lack of representation, but towards each other. We just recently saw a teenage boy assaulted by an adult man twice his size and then have a drink dumped on him when he stole his Donald Trump MAGA hat. We just saw the horrific treatment. Judge Janine Perino, was spat upon by Whoopi Goldberg and cussed at. We saw these sentiments yesterday. This is going on. We had an individual want to know if those were Democrats or Republicans outside playing ball. And then when he found out they were Republicans, they were opening fire. And people are still saying, well, we're going to erupt in violence pretty soon. We have.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And this is why, as we've talked about many times before, secession is actually a relief valve to this pressure because it allows for diversity to occur. And right now, because of this stupid idea that we're a nation, we inevitably define what that means by gaining national power. Well, where's national power? Back to that graphic that you guys developed. In that stupid 10-mile square swampland we affectionately refer to as Washington, D.C. The problem is there. You know, one of the things, I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, Suzanne, we talked about it before. One of the things that the founding generation had going for it is that it properly identified who the enemy was. And the enemy back in 1774, 5, 6, leading up to the War for Independence, was King George and Parliament 3,000 miles across the pond. Make no mistake about it. Everybody knew who they were fighting. Yes, there were surrounding issues of the tax stamp and supposed quartering of soldiers and all this stuff. All the complaints in the Declaration are there. But the bottom line is they zeroed those complaints towards the actual object of those that was that entity that was forcing its will on what they wanted to be, a free people. It was King George. One of the great problems we have right now is that we believe oppression's coming from the other party. We define our conversations that way. Oh, it's Barack Obama, it's Hillary Clinton. They then say, oh, it's the conservatives and Donald Trump and the GOP. And so they keep us fighting party to party. And who gets insulated from that? The corporation, the evil corporation called Washington, D.C. gets insulated from that because nobody ever says they're the problem. Everybody says, oh, it's the other party. If only they weren't in power. Well, folks, half of the country, perhaps more than half of the country, truly are progressive liberals. You just need to accept that demographic reality. Now, if more than half of the country are filled with progressive liberals, and you're talking about the left coast, the west coast, the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and they get control of federal power, regardless of party, because don't think for a minute that those Republicans in the Northeast, a few that are up there, are conservatives. They're not. They just are liberal Republicans. But when progressives get control of national power, guess what you're getting more of? You're going to get more government, you're going to get more government control, and you're going to raise the tension, and you're going to be told by Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity that all we need to do is we have to get our guy into power, which never will happen. You are being told a lie every single day, and it feeds you because you think, oh, we actually can still win this. No, you can't. Progressive liberalism has dominated the public education. It has dominated higher education. What do you think is going to happen? When they have control of the major institutions in a society, whether it be media, whether it be entertainment, whether it be education, whether it be government, when they have control of those various institutions, what do you think is going to happen? The country's going to take on that flavor. So what do we have? We have a legal right to murder a baby. And it's become accepted. I mean, you saw the conversation on your thread there. There are people out there that literally believe I have the right to legally murder somebody. Now, just ponder those words for a minute. They don't shock us anymore the way they probably should because we've just grown accustomed to it over 45 years.
And our position is accepted now as extreme.
Yeah, right. We got marginalized. We marginalized ourselves because we have a premise that says it's all 50 states become conservative Christian nation or it's no 50 states. We're going to constantly shoot for the Holy Grail, never, ever achieving it, and then pound our chest about how patriotic we are, how much we love the Constitution, how honoring we are to our founding generation. No, it's actually the exact opposite. As you alluded to at the very beginning of the show, Suzanne, what does Jefferson Penn, what does he say to do when you run into tyranny? He actually has a remedy. It's the remedy they actually used. So it's not just the theoretical. They actually threw off the king. He says you alter, you abolish, or you throw off that tyrannical government. Folks, why is this shocking to us? Why our very DNA, our historic DNA comes from people who did what they said they were going to do. When in that declaration where they are signing it saying, we have these complaints against you, the king. We are now asserting our independence. And in doing so, we are throwing you off. You are no longer in control of us. We are physically going to lift you up and send you back to England. Now, of course, they went north and west, but you get the imagery. Those people had principles. Those people actually loved freedom a lot more than the average conservative does. The conservative, you know what the average conservative really likes is power, just like the progressives. They like power. They want to get it in Washington, D.C. And then they think in some delusional form that by getting national power in Washington, D.C., they're going to force California and Oregon and Washington and Nevada, and they're going to force all the upper Midwest states, and they're going to force all the Northeast to become this new moral utopia that they dream of their little house in the prairie days.
The thing is,
they're going to be able to do that with political power.
With the Republican Party, too, is I will say this, at least the Democrats are honest about their goals. They are honest about wanting to turn this into a completely socialist United States of America with a K in there. The Republicans lie. How many election cycles did they go through promising to get rid of Obamacare? Did not happen. They lied time and time again. And going back to our origins here, the Declaration of Independence and what Thomas Jefferson said, you know, when there comes a time when you have to overthrow a tyrannical government. They knew when they signed that document that King George was not going to say, okay, yeah, fine, be on your way. They knew that this was going to be, first of all, they were going to be charged with treason. They could be hung, drawn, and quartered. It wasn't going to be a pretty end. No one's willing to put their lives on the line like that right now. But boy, oh boy, we'll pound those keyboards. And I'm going to use a Sharpie when I vote because that shows I really, really mean it when I fill out that form. Or I'm going to push that button so hard. They knew there was going to be a war, but they still said, we need to make a very significant change and be governed by an organization to which we have consented. So we were born under that premise. We formed Articles of Confederation. That was modified again to the Constitution. And again, free states reserved the right to leave whenever they wanted to. Well, guess what? Several times, at least twice, northeastern states tried to leave and talked about secession. They didn't follow through. But when the Confederate States of America finally did, boy, oh boy, that term or that condition was abandoned outright. Also, they could collect a tax. Since that time now, we have Title 18, United States Code 2385, which makes it a federal offense to even teach the need for a violent overthrow of this very tyrannical government that illegally and unconstitutionally formed going back to our Genesis. We were secessionists from the get-go. Ostensibly, right now, we are violating a federal code. And let me just talk about treason really quick, because everybody says Donald Trump is committing treason against the United States. Treason was defined in the Constitution as waging war against the states. Who waged war against the states? We've had one president that did that so far, and he is a hero in the public school system. That is why everybody is so predisposed to try to buck this general government, because Lincoln was a hero. He ended slavery. He saved the Union. If you try to slay the sacred cow of St. Lincoln, you are going to be in just as much trouble as if you say something as crazy as, I think it's wrong to murder the unborn.
Suzanne, I'll tell you the biggest impediment in my view to bringing about real change that could restore freedom in some parts of this union of 50 states are conservatives. They really are the impediment.
They are.
They think they just have a better idea than the progressives, and people are just waiting for it. Oh, give me some of that conservative little house in the prairie lifestyle. I want that. People in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, the plain states, they don't want little house in the prairie, and they're going to actually fight you to stop you from thinking you can force that on them. they want to live the life they want to live. And conservatives insist that you are all going to live how we determine you should live. And we're going to get national power and we're going to force it. Well, what the conservatives have miscalculated is this massive, and I mean massive, demographic shift that's going on right now. The baby boom generation, my generation, is exiting stage right. We are going into eternity. And with it, all the nostalgic ideas about Lincoln, all the nostalgic ideas about our founding, the national anthem, all those things are exiting because the Gen Xers, the millennials don't embrace those ideas. They don't. They cheer Colin Kaepernick. And so who's coming into power right now? It is the Gen Xers. And if you think you're going to put them back on Little House on the Prairie, you are delusional. You are yet there are hundreds of millions of dollars being raised on that concept. Send us $25 so we can get the right Supreme Court justice appointed. Send us $25 so we can restore the Constitution. All the and most sadly, most conservatives, ill-informed and improperly motivated by mainstream talk radio, swoon. Oh yes, if we can just get Ted Cruz in there, you watch, old Ted's gonna let him have it. And we continue to live in a delusion where the progressives continue to march on in reality. We live in a dream world, and I'm all for dreams. We live in a dream world, conservatives, and the progressives live in reality. They are winning hands down. Evidence? One of the sacraments of secular humanism is the wholesale slaughter of babies. We've sacrificed 63 million to the temple, babies to the temple worship of the state and secular humanism. Folks, secession is the relief valve to all this. But if you're insistent on this unbiblical idea that God created America and formed us into a nation, number one, you can't prove any of that. You cannot prove any of that. And number two, all it does is distract you from using a tool that actually can restore freedom in some states. So we ran a candidate down here. My good friend Dan Fisher in Oklahoma ran on a 6-point plan to abolish abortion in Oklahoma by reasserting or asserting, perhaps for the first time for Oklahoma, state sovereignty. In other words, we're going to tell the federal government to go pound sand.
And never once did Dan and his philosophies try to cross state lines.
No, we didn't say, if we do it here, Arkansas, you have to obey. We didn't. It's not how it works. And so now we had nearly 36,000 people go to the polls and say, hey, I want some of that. I'm with that guy. I want to abolish abortion and tell Washington to go jump in the Potomac. Now, here's what's interesting, and this goes back to Title 18. We don't even need to advocate for violent overthrow.
Nope.
Because it's happening right now. Oklahoma, conservative red state Oklahoma, through a referendum, changed our law to allow for medical marijuana in State Question 788. It won overwhelmingly. 57% of the people went to the polls, highest turnout in the primary ever. Went to the polls and said, we are ordering you, the state, the government. So, oh gosh, this was such a great thing that happened. The people told the elected officials, you are going to obey us. We are not going to let you determine the outcome of this issue in our state. And we are going to authorize the use of medical marijuana in our state. Now, there's been some hijinks up there in the state capitol since this question passed. Now, I don't care whether you're for or against it.
It's the principle.
Issue is this is federalism at work. This is the people, consent to the governed, telling their elected officials, you will now obey us. We won't obey you on this anymore. We are taking back control of this issue. Number one, consent to the governed, Declaration of Independence. Number two, it told Washington, D.C., we don't care what your stupid federal drug policy is in our state. So we are going to openly defy you as well. So two great things. Now, Oklahoma, this was not unique to us. There's 20 some odd states that did it before us. But it shows that people are beginning, at least on some issues, to understand they actually hold the power. And this is a good thing, folks. Now, I don't care where you are on the issue. It's not, I wrote a post yesterday on this. It doesn't matter to me where you are on the issue. It's a good thing that the people of Oklahoma, majority of the people, 57% of the voting population on June 26th went to the poll and they said, we are now ordering you, state government there on 23rd and Lincoln, we are ordering you what to do. You aren't telling us what to do. We're telling you what to do. Folks, that is where, that's the seeds of freedom beginning to reemerge in people's minds. Now, imagine if we applied that metric to abortion. Imagine if Dan had become the governor and there were 200,000 people here that voted for him and said, state judges, we are telling you what to do. You're not telling us what to do. We're telling you what to do. And federal government, we are openly defying your unjust rule that legalizes the murder of babies in our state. Now, we're not saying that's going to happen in New Mexico and Arkansas and Kansas and Texas or north, south, east, and west. Our legislation in our state has no bearing on that. But in our state, the people are telling you, state judges, you're going to obey us. And federal government, we're telling you, go pound sand. You are not going to legalize the murder of babies in our state. Suzanne, that gives me hope. This medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, gives me hope. This doesn't even need to be violent. It can be peaceful if we just figure out those two concepts, one in the Declaration and one really in the Declaration as well, this idea of federalism or confederation. We still have to live together. Oklahoma cannot pick itself up and move, 16 miles into the Gulf. We suddenly are living there. We still live next to Arkansas, Kansas, New Mexico, and Texas.
If we have true federalism, people have a place to go.
Yes, yes.
If you want your bastion of your abortion rights, your gay marriage, whatever you consider uniquely liberal, progressive, you have states to go to.
Sure.
Christians have no place to go where we can just exercise our responsibility to not murder the unborn. This is what happens when you have such a contentious issue forced down the throats of so many by so few. And what I see also is the conservatives typically don't take up the fights like they should. Well, we're just going to wait for Roe. We're going to wait for the next justice. I'm not convinced. So what if Roe versus Wade is overturned? So what? The states still have to get the temerity to criminalize abortion like Dan Fisher was trying to do in Oklahoma. And what we have here is I'm looking at an article right now that says it's obviously a very pro-abortion article, but they are saying these are the fear tactics that Roe guarantees an individual liberty. This is about basic human liberty and freedom, but they're forgetting completely the liberty, the right to life of the unborn human beings. They're saying this is about a right to use contraceptions. The guarantee of individual liberty is bound together through decades of accumulated legal precedent. You know what? Dred Scott was legal precedent, okay? This was interconnected framework, they said, with Roe is a load-bearing element. So in other words, they say knock it down and the entire structure falls. So if we lose the right granted by the Supreme Court of the United States that they made up as part of the Constitution, that our entire system is a house of cards and it's going to come crumbling down. Folks, this is what we are up against here at Cerberus Radio Network. The indoctrination is so deep, it is so complete, and it has filled a generation full of hateful individuals who are ignorant, they are godless, and they made fun of us for being old, but they're saying, well, we're 19, so we have a right to say what we want, but you're old and you don't have a right to say what you want. The whole thing has just gotten so ridiculous. This whole thing can be avoided. I'm going to be away next week. I hope the Mark and Suzanne show will continue while I'm gone. I'm going on a little vacation. We are going to get back on track and be together on a regular basis. My son had surgery a couple weeks ago. Then Mark, you had your incident, and thank God that you're okay now. But we will be back next week. Mark, I'll let you close out the show.
Yeah, I'm glad you joined us, folks. This is the kind of radio we want to continue to produce for you, but also for the greater cause, the greater good. We want to stop this Holocaust here in this country, in as many states as we can. Folks, today, it's right now 1 minute before 10 o'clock. Our abortion mills are fired up, their boilers are running, and they've probably murdered 2 or 3 babies at this point. In your state, that same thing has happened. If we turn a blind eye to that, may God help us. We will give account for turning a blind eye, especially when we have the tools to end this. Right now, you're listening to the Mark and Suzanne Show. I'm Mark, she's Suzanne. We'll see you around the corner here soon.